Oregon's a big old fat favorite against Purdue, and they should be. Do they need to cover that spread?
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Purdue at a glance. Is recruiting going to surge? We're talking about those things on today's show with my guy, Ma Torres, on 3, ScoopDuck.com. Also hosts the Ducks Dish podcast, and my man is always got his feet to the fire, grinding away, and it's just been way too long since we've done a show together, Max. So let's start with that particular question. Does Oregon need to have a big, dominant 30 to 40 point win and avoid the old emotional letdown in a trap game spot here against Purdue?
It's great to be back, Spencer. Thanks for the invite. Always good to chat with you. It has been a long time, and what better time than now after a big win to come on. I don't think Oregon needs like a massive performance per se against Purdue. I think a lot of people are maybe a little bit weary of the big game hangover and how Oregon's going to show up following the biggest regular season win since the last time they beat Ohio State in 2021. So I don't think that Oregon needs to have a dominant, miraculous performance, anything like that. But you want to kind of put your best foot forward and show that you're able to kind of navigate those wins as they come. You get a short week and you got to travel all the way out to Indiana. So I think you feel good about Oregon's chances, clearly, but it's still a game you got to line up and play, and still one that you can, I think, learn a lot from.
Yeah, Dan Lanning has not lost to an unranked team yet as Oregon's head coach, and, to a lot of people that might not sound like a whole heck of a lot, but I watch really good coaches lose to unranked teams all the time. I watch big programs lose to unranked teams all the time. I think the Ohio State win is the premier feather in his cap as a head coach, especially given the 12th man revelation that came out this week. I got to get your thoughts on that because I led my show with it yesterday. I thought it was just fantastically awesome that he even thought about that scenario and then had the guts to call the timeout and put him out there. Like, what do you think about that whole thing?
That was a really wild situation, Spencer, and one that I didn't realize as it was happening in the moment down there on the field at Autzen Stadium. And I don't know, I think I talked about this the other day on one of my shows, but when Lanning was asked about it, it didn't seem like he outright claimed that he did it, but he also didn't deny it. He said that they've worked on it, so I think a lot of people kind of just took that as, oh yeah, it was intentional. So shout out to my guy James Crepia because he asked if it was intentional. He was very direct with his questioning, but I don't know if Lanning was as direct with his answer. But either way.
But I do think his answer was enough for us to know, like, this was on purpose. But I think the angle you're coming at from a PR standpoint in that sort of situation is I don't want to project an image of I'm trying to bend the rules.
Sure.
Like It's smart from a PR standpoint, but I think it was as honest as you could get in terms of saying, yeah, we did that 100% on purpose.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable way to look at it as well. So it's just crazy. I think it shows more than ever. I think that not only that instance, but the Ohio State game at large, it shows that Dan Lanning is an asset as an in-game coach and decision maker. And then just if you look more at large at the decisions that he made, just how aggressive he was in that Ohio State game, particularly the onside kick, that was huge. You really stole possession from the Buckeyes. I think that was massive. That was major. And I think a lot of Oregon fans probably think it's a breath of fresh air from the predecessor.
Yeah, and with this Purdue game, it has all the makings of the emotional letdown because this was such a huge game, as everybody knows. And before the year, I had this one pegged as an absolute trap game, and we'll talk more about the Boilermakers in the second segment on today's show. But I think more than anything, what Oregon can accomplish here, Max, is to reassure voters and the rest of the country, not that they care about that, but that certainly does play a factor if you're talking about the subjective world of college football, but also to assure Oregon fans that, hey, that Ohio State game was the best Oregon has played this year, and it was a huge spot, but that they didn't just peak, and that wasn't their Super Bowl. Like, it was a huge game, but that it was, a big step along the path to what the ultimate goal is. That's what I think they can showcase this week against Purdue is, hey, we've shown that we can play at this level. We've shown we can play down to Idaho's level, but we've shown that we can play at Ohio State's level as well. And I think this matchup with Purdue is an opportunity to showcase that, what Dan Lanning preaches really comes to fruition, which is, hey, we play Oregon every week, and we're playing ourselves, and there's a standard that we've got to play to, and that the ultimate goal is not to beat Ohio State. That was a goal for that point in time, but the ultimate goal comes later, and you have to keep winning these games in order to accomplish that.
And that's a great focus for this team, Spencer. If you watch the Ducks versus them that was released about that game, he was
so good,
so amazing. Just talking about how this isn't kind of where we're going to stop. We're going to keep growing, keep pushing, and that's where you want to be as a team. And especially with the expanded playoff, the longer season, the travel that Oregon's going to have to do. Earlier this season, they haven't had to go too far. It's pretty much been all West Coast or Western region, right? So I think that gearing up for the remainder of the season and being able to continue striving, continue improving is going to be a big part. And I don't even think that that's just the starters, but even the people anywhere within the two deep. I think that's going to be huge. What we're seeing right now, Justice Lowe is getting called on with Trayshawn Holding getting ejected last game, and then I think Kyler Casper is going to be banged up for a little bit. He's expected to miss some time, I believe, is what Lanning said at the last press conference. So there's going to be guys that are going to be called upon throughout this year. And I think one of the guys that I'm kind of focused on, maybe even for this game, it feels like a great opportunity, Spencer, for Noah Whittington to really step up. Not to say that he hasn't stepped up. Jordan James has just dominated the carries, but there's going to be a point in time this year where the Ducks are going to need Noah Whittington to produce a bit more than he has. So that's been one of the surprises for me, is that he just hasn't quite looked like the same player from a year ago. Maybe it was the injury. Maybe Jordan James is just doing that well. But either way, I think that they're going to need him at some point this year. And he's one of those guys that I think can really benefit from a game like this, where the Ducks are projected as heavy favorites.
Yeah, and I don't think Whittington has been bad. He's definitely not looking like the exact same guy he used to. I think that's a function, Max, of being a more decisive number two back to Jordan James than I thought coming into the year. And I'm not against that, by the way, because you can't argue with Jordan James' results. I mean, short yardage, explosive runs, the pass protection, that might be my favorite Jordan James play.
Dude, that play against Ransom, I saw that in real time, and I was like, bro, did you see that? That was crazy.
And it set up the last touchdown that Oregon scored in the game. And those are the sorts of things that he brings to the table, that he's been bringing to the table, and why he's Oregon's number one guy. And I think he's kind of the biggest bell cow back that Oregon has had in quite some time. Like, even Bucky Irving last year, it was a much closer, at least it seemed. I haven't compared the exact numbers and the ratio because, of course, we haven't played a full season of college football yet. But it felt like more running backs were involved last year than this year, where they're leaning on Jordan James. But, I mean, he's a physical runner. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Is how can you not? He's a tone setter. He's breaking explosive plays. He's doing things in pass protection. Like, it's hard to argue with the production he's had, but I do like your point on Noah Whittington, because, I mean, Jordan James, a physical runner, he could get banged up at some point this year, and you can't afford to have a major drop-off against some of the teams Oregon will play.
And with James, as far as the bell cow part that you were talking about, he's probably the most clear bell cow since Royce Freeman, I would think.
That's where my head was going.
Because you had C.J. Verdell and Travis Dye, and then obviously last year had Jordan James and Bucky Irving. So, yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know, I think about that and how the Niners, my Niners, are using Jordan Mason a lot. Another Jordan. Not as much as I don't think the Ducks are using Jordan James quite as much. But, yeah, it's to that point. It's a physical game. He plays a physical brand of football. There's always that chance of injury, although you never hope it happens. And then the other part that's not really an elephant in the room, but a reality at this point, Jay Harris isn't a major factor in this offense. I mean, I don't even think he's registered a touch yet this year. So we kind of are at this point, Spencer,
I think he's got one. I think he might have had one against Oregon State.
Okay, maybe, yeah, very few either way. But we're at a point in the season where we kind of thought coming into the year that this was going to be a three-headed monster situation with Jordan James, Noah Whittington, and oh my God, Jay Harris, total brain fart. And that's just not where we're at now. So you kind of got to adjust. There's ebbs and flows. Maybe that we see a little bit more of Kenyon Sadiq running the ball a little bit, some more screenplays. I know that a lot of people have had a lot to say about the screenplays this year. So just an interesting point right now with where this running offense is behind Jordan James.
Yeah, Jay Harris, 3 carries for a net of 3 yards so far this year. Like he hasn't been a factor. I thought he could be, and the staff clearly doesn't think he's ready. But like it's really hard to argue with the results. We're going to talk about Purdue at a glance because that's Oregon's next opponent, of course. Game is on Friday night. If you didn't miss that, it's got every aspect that you could possibly want for a trap game spot, and we'll talk about that and what to expect from the Boilermakers coming up next. First, a reminder, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So where else are you going to go? To America's number 2 or 3 or 4? No, go to the #1 sportsbook. Of course. They've got Oregon favored by about 4 touchdowns against Purdue. Big number. Road spot, short week, emotional letdown. You do whatever you like. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. $200 guaranteed. Wait, what else do you need? What else are you waiting for? America's #1 sportsbook, $200 in bonus bets. Check them out at FanDuel.com because they've got Oregon, they've got everything else in college football as well. It's all over there for your enjoyment at FanDuel.com. So, Max, this game against Purdue, here are the litany of factors if Oregon fans are trying to talk themselves into raising alarm bells. I have a hard time talking them down. You've got post-Ohio State emotional letdown with a huge win factor that you could think about. You have the post-Ohio State physicality factor. Like, that was a knockdown, drag-out, 4-quarter fight, and that was a physical football game on both sides. You've got a short week. You've got a long way to travel, and you're going to a place in West Lafayette that's been a house of horrors for top 10 teams over the years, at times, of course. I think this Oregon team is ready to overcome all of that because of the way that they have played against non-conference teams this season and in the past under Dan Lanning. But there's no shortage of factors to overcome for Oregon to have the sort of performance they're capable of.
And the other thing that I think about with this trap game element, Spencer, is you can't help but compare. I feel like I like comparing Mario Cristobal teams to Dan Lanning teams, right? When Mario Cristobal was the head coach at Oregon and they had to go on the road, regardless of how far they had to travel, you didn't really know what kind of team was going to show up. And I think for me, that win that the Ducks got over Washington State 2 years ago, I think it was in 2022, it was on the road where Mace Funa had that crazy pick. Not only did the Ducks come back to win that game, which was, I think, really, really big, but they showed up on the road. And I think now under Dan Lanning, you have more confidence than you have had in the past if you're a Duck fan of your team showing up and rising to the occasion on the road. It doesn't feel like a big occasion because you're going against a 1-5 Purdue team, but in the broader picture, in the background, with the context of everything that just happened last week in Eugene, it is a big game because now you're the number 2 team in the country and you are being looked at as someone who should dominate everybody who kind of comes in their path, right? With the exception maybe of, a game against Michigan in a couple of weeks in November. And
Wisconsin's looking a lot better, by the way.
Wisconsin as well. So there's some big games on your schedule, and it's kind of, you got that win, but what have you done for me lately? Can you keep it going? Can you show up and dominate someone that you're expected to? And Purdue's a dangerous team now that they have that change at quarterback.
Yeah, and so the response I get from some people when I talk about a trap game or a letdown spot is, it's just, players don't worry about that stuff. It's media crafted. It's it's all that sort of stuff. If Alabama loses at home to Georgia, I think they beat Vanderbilt on the road, but they beat Georgia at home. You're riding high, you go on the road, 20-plus point favorite, and you lose a game outright. Like, this Purdue team has not been very good this year. They're 1-5. They haven't won a Big Ten game. Some notable outcomes to just kind of compare. Notre Dame, who has kind of figured things out, but I don't know about entirely. They've been up and down this year. Went to Purdue earlier this year and won 66-7. This Purdue team went to Corvallis, played Oregon State, where Oregon won 49-14, and lost the game 38-21. Now, they made a change at offensive coordinator, got rid of Graham Harrell, the same Graham Harrell who threw the ball to Michael Crabtree against Texas in a top 10 showdown in Lubbock all those many years ago with Brent Musburger on the call. Yes, that guy was the offensive coordinator at Purdue. He is not anymore. He's been relieved of his duties. And in those two games, they scored 6 points at Wisconsin and got blown out. And then last week, they went to Champaign to play Illinois, were trailing 27-3, and lost the game in overtime. They put up 49. And I think the quarterback change to Ryan Brown from Hudson Card, who is dealing with concussion issues, has been a good one so far. And, you know, I did not watch the game live, but when you check out the highlights for Ryan Brown against Illinois last week, Max, that looks like a guy that was kind of under-recruited.
Yeah, and that definitely, I think, fits the narrative, if you will, of Purdue. I think that they're not really a team that recruits a lot of high caliber players, but they do more with less. No. You look at a guy like Rondale Moore, who was a sensation there. My whole thing with Purdue, Spencer, this is kind of funny. One of my best buddies from my high school years, his name's Matt. If he's watching, no chance he's watching. Maybe he's watching. I don't know. He went to Purdue, and he was at the upset over Ohio State.
He could
in
be.
2016.
You never know.
So
the show's free and available wherever you get your podcasts.
There you go. It is. So every time I think about Purdue, and he's like, "Oh man, you don't want to come out to Purdue on a Friday night or a Saturday night, whatever it might be." So that's just kind of the lens that I look through it from. And I don't know. It's been a rough go in West Lafayette, right? I think when they made that head coaching change, they were probably expecting better results than this. But I don't know. Maybe this is not necessarily their Super Bowl, but if you can compete with Oregon, at least for any portion of the game, really, I think if you're Purdue, you're at least getting some confidence that things could be heading in the right direction, especially with a change at quarterback, because so often the acclaim or the criticism falls on the quarterback. And if they can see some positives, then maybe this is a totally different team. Like that's really all it takes sometimes is a different quarterback, at least offensively, of course.
Yeah, and Ryan Brown, you know, the 49 points was the most they put up against a legitimate opponent this season, and he can move. I mean, he has got some serious mobility. He's got a solid arm, made some really good throws. Devin Mukabe is a running back who was all Big Ten honorable mention last year. Reggie Love will also get some carries. They've only averaged 340 yards per game on offense on the season, but again, they went on the road, and for a half, they only scored 3 points against Illinois. But then they started to figure it out, and you look up and they had 49 at the end. There was some craziness. They had a defensive touchdown mixed in there as well. But the big thing for the Boilermakers going into this game against Oregon, Max, they're allowing 39 points a game and 454 yards per. And the Oregon offense just put up 32 on maybe the best defense in the entire country in Ohio State. And they struggled against Illinois defending on the perimeter. I'd expect Will Stein, who had a great game plan and fantastic in-game management last week against the Buckeyes, I think he watches that film and says, we are going to the perimeter early, and often you're going to see tosses, you're going to see wide receiver screens, you're going to see RPOs where they exploit the flats. Illinois had a lot of success with that last week against this Purdue defense. They just don't look like they have the team speed to cover the edges.
And Oregon's got some serious playmakers, Spencer. I mean, the emergence of Evan Stewart last week against the Buckeyes was just unbelievable to see. I mean, not that you didn't think it would happen, but from what you've seen from him to this point in the year, for him to have that performance was just absolutely incredible. So you have him, you have Tez, a litany of options to really get involved here. Maybe Dylan Gabriel uses his legs some more. I mean, he only carried the ball 4 times last week, but one of the carries that he did, he took it to the house for a huge touchdown. So I think Oregon's got the playmakers to exploit the Purdue defense, and it should be another fun offensive showing.
I'm going to throw this out here right now before in the last segment we talk a little recruiting and what could come of the big win against Ohio State. After this year, Oregon is going to lose Terrence Ferguson and Patrick Herbert. They will be out of eligibility. T. Ferg will get drafted. Patrick Herbert could find his way onto a roster. I certainly hope he does. Kenyon Sadiq could be Oregon's number 1 tight end. Remember the name Max Clare. He is, I believe, a junior or a redshirt sophomore for the Boilermakers at tight end this year. I wonder if after this game, Dan Lanning doesn't think back in the offseason and say, hey, we need a tight end in the transfer portal. I wonder if that guy at Purdue would come to Oregon. That's all I'm going to say right now. That is not inside information. This is gut intuition. I'm throwing something on the wall to see what sticks. Max Clare, just remember that name as Oregon seeks to find a tight end or finds a way to shore up their tight end room going into 2025. Speaking of 2025, there's a recruiting class that Oregon is still working to fill out, and they had a big visitor weekend. Big visitor weekend against Ohio State. Pretty good showcase, I think, of Autzen Stadium. What could come of that? It's coming up next. Guys, ever feel like you need a little boost in the bedroom? It's time you stop worrying about your performance and get HIMSHims so you can feel confident knowing you will be at your best whenever you're in the mood. The process, 100% online. There's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits, and HIMSHims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Check them out at hims.com/lockedon. Max Torres of ScoopDuck.com and the Ducks Dish Podcast joining me here on the show. So, Max, let's talk the recruiting angle because Oregon had a long line of visitors at Autzen Stadium, and I don't know that you can think of a better showcase for Oregon football than that game against Ohio State. And it gives me a lot of vibes from Washington 2018, which is what Kayvon Thibodeau has said was the moment he decided, I'm going to Oregon. I want to be a part of this. I just have to imagine there was at least one kid, if not more, who thought, oh, I want to be a part of this. That was awesome after that Ohio State game. What say you?
I say that there was, in fact, at least one that we know of right now. One of the newest Oregon commits, Tamuhini Tapoya, 2026 defensive lineman out of Mater Dei here in Southern California, basically said just that. I interviewed him after he committed to the Ducks on Sunday, and he said after the game he texted his mom and more or less said, hey, we got to make this happen, and then went into the HDC, and the rest was history. He told the staff that he was going to be becoming a Duck and choosing Oregon. So I was definitely happy to hear that because I had that prediction in for quite a while. I think I was the first one anywhere, but hey, I don't want to pat myself on the back too much here.
I'll pat you on the back, virtually, of course. Here's my hand. Look, I'm patting Max on the shoulder. That a boy. Yeah, there you go.
It was massive, Spencer.
We just confused everybody listening on audio. Like, what's happening right now?
Hey, now they have to watch the YouTube version to see that awkward moment. But it was funny. It's all good vibes here. So the Ducks got two big commitments. Tamuhini Tapoya, a defensive lineman, like I said, in the 26th class. You also had Viliami Moala out of Salt Lake City, Utah, out your way, Spencer, Bingham High School. He flipped from a very fresh pledge to the USC Trojans. So clearly he really likes what Lanning is building in Eugene. And there's also a bunch of 2025 guys that we could talk about. So there's literally so many names, Spencer. It just depends where you want to go.
Yeah, and I mean, the name that I wanted to jump to first is Jakheem Stewart because this is a guy who Oregon has been tied to for a while, one of the top defensive linemen in the class of 2026, except now he's 2025. And for someone in the trenches to reclassify to a year earlier, it's one thing when Kyler Casper did it, at the wide receiver position. But to be a defensive lineman and be able to reclassify and remain one of the most highly coveted players at your position in that cycle, this would be a massive, massive get. And I'm just having these visions, Max, of a defensive line that is Jakheem Stewart and Aiden Breland and Amari Washington and Mateo Uiagalelei, who oh my gosh, we could talk about him for 20 minutes if we wanted to. But and Tatum Tuioti, like all these guys, Elijah Rushing could be poised for a big, second season in Eugene next year. Like, where do you think Oregon stands with him? Because this is someone who a lot of people want and have been recruiting for a very long time, but he was there on Saturday night.
He was there on Saturday night, and he loved what he saw, Spencer. I was able to get an interview with him on Sunday as he was getting ready to head back to Louisiana. And I don't want Duck fans to get like overly excited about this, but I would think that Oregon leads coming out of the visit. But that being said, the question then becomes, Spencer, can they hang on to that lead? Because he has some more official visits that he wants to take. This one looks like it is pretty focused on Oregon, USC, LSU, and Ohio State. Those are the teams that have the most traction in Jakheem Stewart's recruitment, but he's as well-traveled a recruit as I've seen any cycle, and I would venture to guess that he'll probably take more official visits outside of those four, so maybe we see some new schools kind of get in the mix here, but he loved his time in Eugene. He said that the amount of attention and time that he got from Dan Lanning was really big, spending time with his family. He said that he told Lanning he didn't want all the attention, but he still gave it to him anyway. I was also talking to his trainer, Clyde Alexander, who described the amount of time Lanning spent with Stewart as, quote, absurd. Absurd was the quote in that one. So I feel like Oregon's been kind of laying in the weeds in this recruitment. They've never been really taken super, super seriously. But from the people that I've talked to in Eugene with knowledge of this recruitment, I think that they feel good about their chances now coming out of the visit. But you still have, just about two months until the early signing period. So there's a long way to go. I think you got to get him back on campus if you want to get this one done. But it's going to be a fun one to track, that's for sure.
Maybe the most fascinating name that was on campus, Naeem Offord. I mean, every day he's here on the show. That's a name you probably recognize going back to the summer months. This is a recruitment that has been buzzing for a while, and there have been articles written in Ohio State publications, I'm pretty sure, or at least one that I know of in an Ohio State publication that has written about the prospect of Naeem Offord flipping. He hasn't done that yet, but he's an Ohio State verbal commit. Auburn has been after him. Oregon's been after him. Oregon's already got a loaded lineup of defensive backs in this 2025 class. Brandon Finney just got a ratings jump from, I think, a couple of different services. But I think Offord is the name that pops in my mind of the most interesting guy, because here he is committed to Ohio State, and he's at Oregon's campus, and he watches Oregon beat Ohio State. Like, how much it's got to weigh on your mind at least a little bit, right? Like, even if Oregon had lost, the spectacle of being there for that particular game would have been great. But they won the game, and I don't think that inherently decides where he's going to go, but it's got to sit in his mind a little bit.
Can't hurt your chances, right, Spencer? You win a game like that, and it's hard. It's got to be hard for the five-star Alabama corner that's committed to Ohio State to not leave that visit thinking, wow, there's something going on in Eugene. So I think with that one, Naeem Offord, for whatever it's worth, he hasn't been back to Ohio State since the summer. He's not a guy that does a lot of interviews. I think most of what's come out has been interviews with his father, and that's the way that he has chosen to play it. So that's his decision. But I don't think there's a lot of people that expect him to stay with that Ohio State commitment. Maybe he gets back on campus. I think he's supposed to go for the Nebraska game potentially in a couple of weeks or later this year, and maybe that all changes. But Oregon and Auburn seem like the two teams with the most traction right now, and I would only wonder to be a fly on the wall on that visit and in those conversations between Offord and the Oregon staff. I would really wonder kind of how that went. So I'm trying to get an interview, but I'm not holding my breath. I think that especially given Brandon Finney's recruitment right now, with schools like Michigan and Penn State looming in that recruitment, Naeem Offord and Brandon Finney kind of become two recruits that are not tied at the hip per se, but they're directly related because Oregon's trying to hang on to one in Finney, and then they're trying to get another in the boat with a guy like Offord. So that's going to be a fun one to follow here, and getting him on campus, you can't ask for a better weekend.
Yeah, no, it was a great recruiting weekend for Oregon, and like we said, just a fantastic spectacle. You cut out for just like a half moment there, Max. I think that's more on my end than yours. Brandon Finney is being courted by Penn State and Michigan, you said?
Yeah, Penn State and Michigan, I think those are two schools that got trips recently. A lot of people kind of had Penn State circled as the school for Finney before he committed to Oregon. So when he did commit to Oregon, I think that was a pretty big shock for people. So no surprise to see James Franklin and the Nittany Lions stay involved there. They obviously have some juice of their own after a win over USC and with the season that they're having. So those two schools, Michigan and Penn State, they definitely have distance on their side here, but Oregon's having a great year, and they're going to do everything they can to hang on to him.
Last thing real quick for you, Max. Are there any other names from this trip that you feel like Oregon fans should have their eye on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Vander Plug is a big one, 2025 Washington tight end commit. He's out of Southern California and was in Eugene over the weekend. That was his first trip since he got offered by the Ducks in August. So if people want to read that, they can go read my full interview over on scoopduck.com. And I think another one would probably have to be 2026 linebacker Talanoa Ely out of Orange Lutheran, also here in Southern California. He's a guy that Oregon's been on for quite a while now, and that was his second trip to Oregon, I think. Ducks made a really good impression, and with the way that the linebackers are playing, I think that's going to be appealing to a lot of recruits, and you're losing two guys in Bryce Betcher, Jeff Bossa, I guess three now, and then probably Justin Jacobs as well. So you're going to need to keep that room stocked with talent, and Brian Michalowski has absolutely tabbed Talanoa Ely as one of his favorites.
Max Torres, scoopduck.com, the Ducks Dish podcast, and just one of my all-around favorite guests to have on the show. Max, appreciate it as always, man. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Spencer.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, go Ducks.